Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Coming up today on Squawk Pod. Elon Musk in politics. He's making waves and dividing his fans.
All of a sudden, you have this turmoil inside MAGA-world.
Plus, the rift among Republican lawmakers. Congressman Chip Roy, why he and 37 of his colleagues voted down the pre-Christmas spending bill approved by President-elect Trump.
Everybody I've talked to has said thank you because they're tired of it. President Trump didn't run on racking up more debt. He ran on controlling inflation.
Then Russia rejects a call for an immediate ceasefire with Ukraine, but said it's ready to hold negotiations. Council on Foreign Relations President Emeritus Richard Haass on war and peace.
Something like a ceasefire in place, it would be more than Ukraine would want to give up, it would be less than Russia wants to grab.
All that and much more today. Netflix, drones, and it's tough to be a French billionaire.
Smallest violin in the world playing for the French billionaires.
A very, very, very small violin.
It's Friday, December 27th. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Ander by in 3, 2, 1. Cue Ander.
Good morning and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Melissa Lee, the said Melissa Lee. It's very nice to see you. Day
Great
two.
To see you too.
Joe and Becky are off today. We've got a whole bunch of things going on this Friday morning. By the way, there's a lot that happened on X in the past 24 hours. We're going to talk about this whole Laura Loomer, Elon Musk free speech thing. We'll go there in a moment. But there's this. Vivek Ramaswamy criticizing America's culture of mediocrity. Ramaswamy is President-elect Trump's pick to lead the Department of Government Efficiency along with Elon Musk. In this post, he says that American culture has celebrated mediocrity over excellence since at least the 1990s. He writes the following, quote, a culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. Ramaswamy saying that, quote, normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent and calls for American culture to fully wake up. I'm not sure this was the 1990s. At least when I grew up, which is even before that, the jock was always given the credit.
For decades.
Right? The valedictorian was always considered the nerd. That's what was going on. It would be great if we celebrated these things more. You know, I've always gone for many years to this thing called the Breakthrough Prize, which is a sort of celebration of scientists where they really try to like glamorize it up as if it's the Oscars. It's something put on by Yuri Milner and Mark Zuckerberg and a whole bunch of folks in Silicon Valley.
Right.
But there's not enough of that where we actually celebrate, you know, the greats. But I do think we are celebrating the greats to some degree in the context of somebody like Elon Musk right now.
Of course. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos,
right.
Mark Zuckerberg. Well, I mean, look who is sort of controlling the emerging industry.
But it's very interesting. They've become, for some people, right? So we are on a business network celebrating them, right? I think we do genuinely celebrate their accomplishments. But there's also this thing going on in the United States right now where people say, well, it's a plutocracy, it's an oligarchy. These people. You know, and so there's sort of this back and forth, and I don't think we've done that to athletes, for example. So the great jock, I don't think people sit around and go, Michael Jordan, you know, right? I think they go, wow, he's the GOAT.
Right.
Across the board. It's not like a polarizing question.
I mean, but that's true talent. Here he's saying the jock and the prom queen, which doesn't necessarily mean that they have those great talents that are so rare to find. When we say Michael Jordan, he is the GOAT. Right. I don't think many people dispute that. There's a talent there. So it's the whole, I think, celebrating true talent as opposed to perceived talent.
But underneath those posts is a much more nuanced and complicated topic, which really is actually around immigration. Right? I mean, that's if you really understand where what this post is saying, it's about we need really talented immigrants. There's obviously a massive debate now happening. There's a backlash against Shri, who was just put on from Andreessen Horowitz, put on this AI committee, who's Indian but an American citizen. There's been a backlash against him, where people are saying, you know, we didn't vote for this. I mean, it's very interesting, just the sort of complicated nature of this. And then there's the question of who's going to do jobs that sometimes. And this goes to the American culture thing that Americans don't want to do. There's a conversation going on right now about coders. Do Americans think that I would have thought coding would be a great job, but maybe
sure.
maybe
but maybe it's just being displaced by AI at this point.
Well, yes, but that's the flip side of people saying, well, we don't want to, folks who are going to pick strawberries in
right.
On the farm.
Bust the dishes at the restaurant.
That somehow Americans don't want to do that. And so I think we have to sort of get all of this in order. But the conversation has sort of gone into
But you mean that it underscores the need for immigration to allow in to our country great talents because we are not cultivating those talents ourselves?
Well, underneath,
as opposed
I don't know if I'm saying that.
To.
I don't know if I'm saying that. I think that's being said here. Elon Musk was making that point yesterday.
Right.
This goes to the HB1 visas, about trying to bring in the top talent from outside. I mean, he said that we should sort of think about the United States as a great basketball team, a great sports team. The NBA happens, in addition to some of the fabulous players that grew up here, including LeBron James and Michael Jordan, and all those people, have brought in great talent from around the world.
Right. There's no backlash against that.
Exactly.
All right, well, the NFL on Netflix on Christmas Day set a record for the biggest audience for a streaming matchup, but the ratings fell short of the audience for last year's Christmas games that ran on broadcast networks. Netflix's 2 games averaged 24.2 million viewers. It peaked at 27 million viewers during Beyoncé's halftime performance at the Ravens-Texans game. Meantime, the NBA slate of Christmas games jumped in viewership by a collective 84% from last year. The games averaged 5.25 million viewers on ABC and ESPN.
My question to you about Netflix and the NFL
is how much was Beyoncé paid?
No. Well, that is still on my mind. But with the ratings down, do we believe that the ratings would have been down on linear broadcast TV as well?
Right.
And how much do we believe the NFL cares about the total size and scale of the ratings versus the amount of money they're able to capture from a Netflix deal? Meaning, one of the reasons that the NFL has always wanted to be, for example, have the Super Bowl on linear TV is they want to reach as many people as humanly possible because they have so many other component parts of the business, right? They have sponsors. They have to put people in stands. They have all sorts of other products that they sell. And so total eyeballs, addressable eyeballs are super important. Then they can carve it up and try to sell other pieces, and which is sort of what they did with Netflix. But the question is a Christmas game matter in terms of the scale and scope of it?
I think that it wasn't a drop in terms of order of magnitude, a drop. And also the benefit with Netflix is that Netflix, those games were viewed globally.
Yep.
So for the NFL, it's a public relations win
and that's the question.
For them to be seen all around the world.
And maybe next year it gets even bigger because people know to go there. I don't know.
Exactly.
This is a question. It's been a rough year for French billionaires. This includes LVMH's founder Bernard Arnault and the controlling shareholders of L'Oreal, also Kering. They have now lost $70 billion from their collective wealth. This according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. And their luxury and personal care companies have suffered from slower spending, not in France or elsewhere, but in China, as well as a weakened appetite for French assets due to the volatile political climate in France. Arnault's wealth alone has dropped by $31 billion just this year. I know the violin is tiny. It's the tiniest of all tiny violins.
This is a statement on luxury goods, though.
It's a statement on luxury goods, and I think it's actually a statement on China.
Yes, of course.
That's
the slowdown there and how profound it is in terms of the impact.
And even some of the sort of shifting winds about what people are buying in the U.S. and elsewhere in terms of just what luxury is. There is a little bit of that. There's a step down. If you go into some of the stores, they're trying to sell lower priced products.
Which LVMH said they will never do.
And they're doing just a little bit.
You would know. I don't. A New Year's Eve drone show in Central Park has been canceled after a disastrous failure of the show by the same company in Florida last weekend. Several of the drones that collided in the show. They fell from the sky, injuring a 7-year-old boy who required open heart surgery as a result of the accident. The Central Park drone show was scheduled to replace a fireworks display that was canceled earlier this month by Mayor Eric Adams in response to the regional drought. The drought restrictions have since been lifted, but the Central Park event organizer said it was too late to pivot back from a drone display to a fireworks show. So I guess now there's nothing, but better safe.
It's interesting because I was under the working assumption, having now seen a couple of these very cool drone shows, that they were safer than fireworks. But in fact, I hadn't really thought about the prospect that if the system isn't designed properly, the drones will hit each other.
Right.
And then they will fall to the
If
ground.
you have hundreds of drones operating in this small space, that seems calamitous to me.
Meantime, some sad news to tell you about this morning. A longtime friend of the show, and somebody I should just say that I have known literally since I was a child, if you can believe this. Richard Parsons has died. He led the turnaround of so many different companies across this country. Time Warner, if you remember, after the disastrous merger with AOL, served as the chairman of Citigroup in 2009. He helped stabilize that bank in the wake of the financial crisis. Back in 2014, he had been named interim CEO of the LA Clippers after the NBA banned owner Donald Sterling for life because he made those racist remarks. He later came out of retirement to briefly serve as the CBS chairman. This after Les Moonves was ousted, but then stepped down after a month, citing his own health concerns. He was battling multiple myeloma. This has been going on for many, many years. The New York Times said the cause of death was cancer. I just emailed with him a couple of weeks ago. He was off to, he was going to hospice. Started his career with Rockefeller and became the CEO of Dime Bank. And I mean, somebody who I think he was considered a fixer-upper. He would walk into a place and through just force of personality and sheer will and a spirit of good faith, more than anything, he was able to take situations that seemed almost impossible and intractable and to work with people who were often complicated. I think of Carl Icahn, and he was one of those people who somehow found a way towards peace. That's who he was, and he was a very, very special man. Dick Parsons was 76 years old.
This is Squawk Pod from CNBC. Today with Andrew Ross Sorkin and Melissa Lee.
In the category of business meets politics meets policy, here we are this morning, a fight now breaking out on social media between Elon Musk and far-right activists over H-1B visas. Earlier this week, activist Laura Loomer criticized President-elect Trump's choice of Indian-born tech investor Sri Krishnan as a senior policy advisor on artificial intelligence. Now, Loomer, who's very close with Trump, or at least had been seen as very close with Trump, said that by supporting Krishnan, that Krishnan, I should say, supported removing some caps on H-1B visas. Now, Musk, of course, once held such a visa and has hailed the program, and Krishnan, by the way, as a key way for tech companies to recruit the world's best talent. There has been a whole sort of now battle over whether Loomer has been blocked or sort of moved down the pile without a blue check mark on her account. Now she's turning it around, claiming there's a free speech thing and that Elon Musk is not allowing free speech on the platform. And so all of a sudden you have this turmoil, if you will, inside MAGA-world over this.
And we should make clear Laura Loomer is a far-right activist.
Yes.
And so does this sort of, foretell divisions amongst the right in MAGA world, right? Because you have a number of Trump's appointees, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, David Sachs, who would be in favor of H-1B visas. Donald Trump himself has made it very clear that he is in favor of legal immigration, and that people with a college degree or with a graduate diploma should be allowed in this country. That would be welcome to stay in this country. We need the talent. And so does this show a division to come in terms
It's
of
fascinating because then, by the way,
together.
you also have a lot of folks who are big fans of Elon Musk who have now taken Loomer's side in this free speech issue, which is how apparently he handled Loomer criticizing him. So there's a whole separate debate. This is happening on sort of a multiple level situation, but we'll keep our eyes on it. And of course, we'll bring you the story as it continues. As the world turns, it's a soap opera. The problem is it's a soap opera, but it's real. In the run-up to last week's passage of the continuing resolution to fund the federal government, President-elect Trump took to his social media platform to blast Texas Republican Congressman Chip Roy. Trump had wanted the debt ceiling to be raised as part of a funding package, but Roy wanted companion spending cuts online. The president-elect called Roy a, quote, Republican obstructionist. And this morning we have Congressman Roy with us. He, of course, is the Freedom Caucus policy chair, and we welcome him to the broadcast. Thanks for coming on. Let's start with this. What did you think when you first read President-elect Trump's comments about you?
Well, Merry Christmas. Great to be on the show. I mean, look, this politics is rough and tumble business. President Trump knows exactly what he wants. He wants the debt ceiling pushed aside so that Chuck Schumer can't use it as leverage against him and against Republicans. And we know Chuck Schumer's been going around the Senate saying he wants to use it to try to constrain President Trump's agenda. So President Trump wanted it gone. Now, here's the problem. We didn't get that tweet till Wednesday night at like 6 o'clock. The president had never told us, hey, I need the debt ceiling or no CR before Christmas. Well, the bill had been built up like a normal Christmas tree bill. With all due respect to Republican leadership, it was a bad bill. It blew up Wednesday afternoon. Those of us who are pretty known and pretty consistent in our track record that we don't agree to borrow more money without forcing some discussion about spending cuts, we said no. And it wasn't just Freedom Caucus. It wasn't just Chip Roy. There were 38 Republicans who stood up and said, wait a minute, we can't do this. And you know what? Since I've been home in Texas, everybody I've seen, everybody I've talked to have said thank you because they're tired of it. President Trump didn't run on racking up more debt. He ran on controlling inflation, driving down spending, securing the border. So I stand up firmly behind it, and I'm not going to blink. I'm not going to vote for a debt ceiling increase unless we have significant spending cuts.
Congressman, have you spoken to President-elect Trump since he made those comments?
Well, I don't talk about private conversations. It's the general rule I have, but I've certainly been in contact with Mar-a-Lago broadly and with Republican leadership. They know where I stand. I think everybody understands, tweets and trying to, pressure that way. That's not going to change why I got elected. I got elected to reduce spending, drive down inflation, shrink government. I'm not going to shy away from that fight. I'm not going to blink.
So let's talk about that, because there's a question mark about what we just saw in the last week and a half and what that portends for 2025 as it relates to the budget, as it relates to potentially taxes, tax cuts, or maintaining the current tax policy in this country, and whether we can balance a budget doing any of these things. How does that lay out for you, if you will?
Well, we've got a plan that we've put together as conservatives and fiscal hawks. We're working with the speaker on that. We're going to work with the president on that. We're working with some of his incoming folks in the administration, from J.D. Vance to Russ Vought, the Treasury Secretary incoming. Look, everybody gets the joke. We're $36 trillion in debt. We're going to run a deficit of $2 trillion this year, $1 trillion in interest, which is more than national defense. So we've got to use the reconciliation process, which only requires Republican votes, to unite around spending restraint, coupled with whatever we need to do on the debt ceiling and whatever tax policy we believe is important for economic growth. But to be very clear, and then look, this is CNBC, a Squawk Box. I've been watching this show for years. Wall Street Journal friends. Look, we believe in tax restraint, but we also need spending restraint. We're going to have to work together to do what's necessary. The Wall Street Journal had an editorial yesterday where they talked about how the reason that we don't cut spending is because a lot of these programs are popular. A lot of people like all of these different programs. They're exactly right. That's why when the Doge guys came in, Elon and Vivek, I pointed to my Republican colleagues and I said, the problem is right here in this room. Because we have Republicans and Democrats who never met a program they didn't want to promote for some sort of political gain. And what I'm saying is we got to pay the piper. The piper's here. We got to do our job. We got to, really stand up and do what we've always said we're going to do, which is engage in fiscal discipline.
How influential do you think that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will ultimately be? Clearly, they ultimately helped kill the original bill, that's for sure. I'm not sure they were thrilled about the final bill that went in, because clearly Trump wasn't there either.
Well, I think they're going to have significant influence in terms of what they're doing. They're identifying a lot of spending ways that I think they can use their pulpit. I think that they can broadcast that, shine the light on it. Transparency is great.
How big a cut do you think? I mean, what do you think they're really going to be able to go after? Do you think they're going to touch health care? Do you think they're going to touch the Department of Defense? Are we talking about just discretionary stuff? And if that's the case, is it just on the margins?
All right, well, let's just take a couple of examples. If we return non-defense spending to pre-COVID era explosion in spending, we could save something like $200 and something billion a year, which scores as $2 trillion over 10. If we were to go through and just put in restraint on the use of food stamps to feed our people sugar, for example, always tied to the Farm Bill, we can save hundreds of billions of dollars. If we repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which is crippling our economy, undermining oil and gas, and empowering China, we could save $750 billion. We can do a lot of savings right out of the gate to reverse the Biden damage, get the economy going, reduce regulations, but not touch benefits that our seniors rely on. Yes, we need to address Medicare and Social Security in the long haul, no question. But right now, we should reverse Biden damage, get spending restraint on Medicaid, reforms that need to be put in place, tax policy that matches all of that, and we need to do our job to constrain the bureaucracy, cutting non-defense discretionary. That would only be a 13% cut. You and I could go find 13% of waste, and I think the Doge guys can too, and that would be fiscally responsible, and the American people would cheer President Trump and Republicans if we do that.
They can find all sorts of cost savings, Congressman, but how does it play out in terms of the process? I mean, once I identify these potential cuts, you guys get into the fray, and then you have the same arguments. How does this actually work?
Well, we've got reconciliation. We've got a couple of bites at the apple. We need to get our plans going right away in January, and we've already been laying those out. We've got to work with the incoming administration to use reconciliation. And for the people out there who don't understand, reconciliation is the process under the Budget Act that allows us to make sure that we're striving for deficit reduction by balancing out the accounts between taxes and spending. So that's our job. And we should do that. By the way, the Democrats used reconciliation to jam Obamacare through. So we have an obligation to reverse the damage of these radical progressive Democrats under the Inflation Reduction Act. And the process is we come together, put together, I think, a step one reconciliation package to give the president tools he needs to secure the border, make sure that defense is in the right place, and make sure everything's paid for, reverse a lot of the Biden damage, and do that in step one with a debt ceiling increase the president wants so Chuck Schumer can't roil the bond markets. Then you come in a second package, deal with the tax policy, and deal with the significant mandatory spending reforms already alluded to, whether it's food stamps, whether it's some of the stuff that's been jammed in there with Medicaid, and a lot of things that we can do to reduce spending. And now we're cooking with peanut oil. Now we can actually do our job.
Congressman Chip Roy, I want to thank you for joining us. We hope we have an opportunity to spend a lot more time talking about all these issues with you in the new year.
Happy to do it. God bless you all. Happy New Year.
You bet. Thank you.
Tease will be next.
Still to come on Squawk Pod, Richard Haass, former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, on the Christmas week fighting between Russia and Ukraine, and the looming January 19th deadline for a TikTok ban on American devices. January 19th, that's the day before a new president starts.
Donald Trump, as you know, has a certain penchant for doing the dramatic, and also he has intervened on behalf of TikTok being able to continue to operate in the United States before.
You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC.
Up and Andrew, Q.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. Russia's foreign ministry has rejected President Trump's, President-elect Trump, but President Trump's call for a ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war following Russia's Christmas Day attacks on Ukraine. But he said that Russia may be open to talks. For the latest on all this, I want to bring you Richard Haass, Council on Foreign Relations President Emeritus. He is now senior counselor with Centerview Partners. Good morning to you, Richard.
Morning, Andrew.
Here we are. What are we? About 25 days before President-elect becomes the president. He said he was going to solve this, I think, in the first 24 hours of his presidency. Is that possible?
It's had ambitious, but it's not inconceivable that within his first year as president, the focus will shift from the battlefield to the negotiating table. I don't take Russia's announcement that it rejects the ceasefire as their final word. What Mr. Trump has to do is persuade Mr. Putin that time is not on his side, that the United States and the West have staying power. I think also it would be good if he allowed Ukraine to inflict some more pain on Russia. And I think it's quite possible that Russia could be brought around, however reluctantly, to negotiate seriously about a ceasefire in place.
What would have to happen, though, to be brought around, if you will?
I think the most important thing would be the United States and Ukraine would reach a deal. We would agree to an open-ended arms support in exchange for their willingness to accept a ceasefire on reasonable terms. I think Mr. Zelensky is now prepared to do something along those lines, and that would send a message to Russia that time is not on their side, that we're there so long as Ukraine has established war aims that are reasonable at this phase. And I think if that happens, and given the state of the Russian economy, which is clearly deteriorating, I think then there's a decent chance we could persuade a reluctant Mr. Putin, again, to accept a ceasefire in place. Doesn't mean Russia would have to give up its long-term ambitions. Doesn't mean Ukraine would. That's the genius, if you will, of an interim ceasefire. No one has to give up their long-term claims. It's not peace, but it is preferable to war.
Right. It also would mean Russia would maintain de facto control over a percentage of the territory it occupies right now. Richard, is there a line in the sand? Do you think that there is, a percentage that would be acceptable to both sides that can be agreed upon? That seems to be a decisive factor in this whole agreement.
Look, if you look at the last 3 years of this phase of the war, the amount of territorial control has not changed that much. After 2014, Russia controlled approximately 20% of Ukraine's territory. They still control around 21% of Ukraine's territory. So again, I think something like a ceasefire in place, it would be more than Ukraine would want to give up. It would be more than or less than Russia wants to grab. But again, it's interim, so I think both sides could probably live with it.
Richard, can we change topics to another country, which is China, this morning? And we'll make it a business topic, and we'll throw TikTok into the mix. The president has talked about TikTok quite openly about, I think his intent, I think he'd like to keep it running if possible, but January 19th, the day before the inauguration, effectively, is the day that this thing is supposed to not stop working, but you're not going to be able to download it or get updates for it on, Apple and Google. What do you think happens here?
I've been giving it a lot of thought. Donald Trump, as you know, has a certain penchant for doing the dramatic. And also he has intervened on behalf of TikTok being able to continue to operate in the United States before. So despite all the rulings up to now, I don't dismiss the possibility that he will try to find a formula where TikTok to continue. He has his friend who's involved. There's a lot of popular support for it. My own enthusiasm for TikTok, shall we say, is limited, given that too many young people use it as a source of news when it's anything but. But my guess is, and again, I don't have evidence for this, it's just my reading of Donald Trump and his past behavior, he will try to find a way to intervene. It's also a way for him to try to put some money in the bank, so to speak, with the leadership of China. That basically, okay, I've done you one thing, now what can you do for me? And that's very much consistent with the transactional approach Donald Trump tends to bring to the presidency.
How do you forecast what the relationship between the U.S. and China will be? Because right now, people are jumping to the worst-case scenario. But Xi Jinping apparently has been invited to the inauguration. Do you think he shows up, and what sort of signal would that send?
Look, this is a relationship that's been deteriorating for a number of years under both Republicans and Democrats. Indeed, Donald Trump, I think, deserves some credit for his first term as president because he introduced a degree of sobriety and realism into U.S.-Chinese relations, essentially saying the whole policy of assuming that if China were integrated into the world economy, it would moderate its behavior at home and abroad. He called them on it. It hasn't worked. He introduced the tariffs. Joe Biden and company kept those tariffs, have since introduced new ones. So this is a difficult relationship. I think over the next 4 years, I'm actually skeptical. I don't think so much what Donald Trump and Xi Jinping can achieve. The real question is what they can avoid. Can we avoid a crisis in the South China Sea? Can we avoid a crisis over Taiwan? Can we avoid an unlimited tariff war? And I think the jury is out on all those things. And I think there's also a debate within Trump world between those people who largely view U.S.-Chinese competition through an economic prism and those who view it more geopolitically. And whichever group proves to be in the ascendance, that could have a real impact on the kind of deals Donald Trump would be prepared to strike with Xi Jinping.
Richard, it is great to see you this morning. Always fabulous to get your perspective on all of it. We will see what ultimately happens. I want to wish you a Happy New Year if we don't see you before then. Thanks.
Thank you as well.
That's Squawk Pod for today and for this holiday shortened week. Thanks for listening. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Our special thanks to Melissa Lee for sitting in. You can watch Squawk Box on TV weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern, or get the best of our show right into your ears in a podcast when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you like to listen. We'll meet you right back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.